Vanessa had always been drawn to nursing, a profession where her compassion and attention to detail could make a real difference in people's lives. She had worked in various settings, from bustling hospitals to quiet care homes, but nothing could have prepared her for her latest assignment. The task was straightforward but mysterious. She was to care for a wealthy, elderly man named William Hartford, who had been in a coma for several months. William had been a reclusive billionaire, known more for his vast fortune than for personal connections. His story was the stuff of legends, tall tales of his incredible rise to wealth, his private estate, and his jet-setting lifestyle. Yet for all his wealth, he had no visitors, no family members to care for him. His life had been reduced to cold, clinical management by a team of lawyers and assistants who ensured his business ventures continued, even if the man himself was completely absent from the world. Vanessa was given this private duty because she was known for being dependable and able to manage the most delicate of cases. She didn't mind the quietness of the assignment. Being alone with someone in a coma didn't make her uncomfortable. In fact, she liked it. It gave her time to focus and practice her care. The first time she entered William's room, she couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between his lavish surroundings and his lifeless state. His large, luxurious room had elegant furniture, expensive artwork, and views of the sprawling estate that surrounded the mansion. It felt almost too opulent for the man lying in the bed, his body frail and unmoving. Vanessa went through the motions of daily care, checking his vitals, adjusting his blankets, making sure his skin stayed healthy. But she didn't just focus on the medical side of things. She believed that even in a coma, a person could still hear and feel. So each day, she spoke to him, telling him about her day, the weather outside, the books she was reading, and occasionally even her thoughts on life. She shared her memories, talking about her childhood in a small town, the struggles of growing up, and the dreams she had as a young girl. At first, it felt a bit strange to talk to a man who was unable to respond. But the longer she did it, the more comfortable it became. Vanessa found herself telling William things she had never told anyone else, personal stories about her own fears, regrets, and hopes for the future. She found herself looking forward to her time with him, almost as if he was a companion who had always been there, waiting for her to share her thoughts. While other staff members and nurses came and went, offering only the most basic care, Vanessa remained steadfast. She never questioned the unusual nature of her role. She believed that everyone, no matter how rich or famous, deserved to be treated with dignity and respect, especially someone like William, who had lived his life in the shadows, away from any real human connection. And so, she carried on with her work, day after day, believing that perhaps in some small way, her presence made a difference to the man who lay in that expensive, lonely room. But little did she know, her time with William Hartford would lead her down a path that would change everything she thought she knew about herself and the mysterious man she was caring for. As the weeks went by, Vanessa settled into a comfortable routine with William. She came to his room every morning, checked his condition, and took care of the medical tasks that were necessary to ensure his comfort. His health had stabilized, but he was still in a deep coma, completely unaware of the world around him. But Vanessa had grown fond of him in her own way, even though he never responded to her or showed any signs of consciousness. She would talk to him as if he could hear her, telling him about the things that had happened in her life that day, the small victories and the minor disappointments. It became a strange but soothing ritual for her. Sometimes, she would read aloud from a book she had brought in, just to keep the atmosphere peaceful. She liked to think that maybe, just maybe, he could hear her words, even if he couldn't show it. One afternoon, while she was adjusting his pillows, something caught her eye. It was a small, leather-bound book on the bedside table. It seemed out of place, almost too personal for a man like William, whose life was otherwise so private. Vanessa's curiosity got the best of her, and she decided to take a look. The book was worn, the cover faded from age, but the pages inside were neatly organized, filled with handwritten notes and old photographs. As she flipped through it, she found photos of a much younger William, smiling and laughing with a woman Vanessa had never seen before. The woman had dark, curly hair, and her smile was warm and genuine. The pictures were taken in different locations, some on what looked like vacations, others in what appeared to be a private home. What struck Vanessa the most was the fact that William seemed completely different in these photos. He was smiling, carefree, surrounded by love. It was a side of him she had never imagined. She had only known the quiet, distant version of him, the man in the sterile hospital bed, but these pictures painted a very different picture. Among the photographs, one stood out in particular. It was a picture of the woman holding a baby. The baby, with its wide eyes and soft features, looked so familiar to Vanessa. She stared at the photo for a long time, her mind racing. There was something about that baby that triggered a memory, but she couldn't place it. The connection was fleeting, but it gnawed at her. She decided to keep the book to herself for the time being, unsure of what to make of it. Why had William kept these photos hidden away? Why had no one else ever mentioned the woman or the baby in the pictures? Vanessa felt a strange pull to learn more, but she didn't know where to start. The more she thought about it, the more questions bubbled up. She couldn't ignore the growing curiosity in her. There was something important about these photos, something that tied them to her in a way she couldn't yet understand. Vanessa had always been a logical person, grounded in facts, but this was different. This was personal. She felt like she was on the verge of discovering something much larger than herself, something that could change everything. At that moment, she made a decision. She couldn't just walk away from this mystery. She needed to find out who this woman was and what role, if any, she played in William's life. And more importantly, why did the baby in the photograph look so much like her? Over the next few days, Vanessa couldn't shake the strange feeling that the photograph had left her with. The more she thought about it, the more she found herself questioning everything she had assumed about her life. There was something deeply unsettling about the baby in the picture. It wasn't just the resemblance. It was the way the woman in the photo held the child. There was a tenderness, a connection that felt real, a kind of bond that Vanessa had never experienced herself. She had grown up in a small town where her family was well known, but she had always felt like there was something missing. Something she couldn't explain. Her mother, a hard-working woman who had raised Vanessa on her own, had always been quiet about her past. She spoke little about her own family, and whenever Vanessa asked questions, the answers were brief and often seemed to avoid anything too personal. But those answers were never enough to satisfy her curiosity. Now, staring at the photograph, Vanessa wondered if the answers she had been searching for all her life might have been right in front of her. It felt too much like a coincidence that the baby in the photo looked so much like her. Could it be possible that there was some connection between her and William Hartford, the reclusive billionaire who was currently unconscious in the hospital room? She knew she had to find out more. Vanessa decided to take a closer look at William's personal records. The nurse in her knew that she was stepping into unfamiliar territory, snooping around in someone else's private life. But her curiosity outweighed any hesitation. She couldn't just leave things as they were. She had to understand what the photograph meant and what role it played in her life. Vanessa had heard whispers among the other staff members that William had been a man with many secrets. He had built his empire through hard work and perseverance, but his personal life had always been a mystery. There were rumors of lost loves and family struggles, but no one knew the full story. Vanessa knew that if she was going to get answers, she would have to go beyond what the others had heard and truly investigate. That night, after finishing her shift, she slipped into William's office. The room was dimly lit, with shelves of books and papers tacked neatly on his desk. She wasn't sure where to start, but the photograph was still fresh in her mind. She began to sift through his files, hoping to find something that might shed light on the woman in the picture. Hours passed as she carefully examined document after document, but there was little to be found. Most of the papers were business-related, dealing with property acquisitions and investments. But just as she was about to give up, she noticed something strange. an envelope tucked in the back of one of the drawers. The envelope was old, with a faded seal on the front, and it looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Vanessa's heart raced as she carefully opened the envelope, revealing a letter. It was dated decades ago, and as she read, her hands began to tremble. The letter was written by William, but it wasn't addressed to anyone in particular. It was a confession of sorts, a letter filled with regret and sorrow. In it, William spoke of a woman he had loved deeply, someone he had lost due to circumstances beyond his control. He mentioned a child, a daughter he had never been able to meet, and the pain he felt at not being able to make things right. The letter left Vanessa in shock. It confirmed everything she had been wondering. William Hartford had a secret, a family he had kept hidden away. And that family, it seemed, was tied to her in ways she hadn't even begun to understand. Now, with this new piece of the puzzle in her hands, Vanessa felt more determined than ever to uncover the truth. The answers were within reach, but the more she learned, the more complicated everything became. What would this discovery mean for her? Would it change the way she saw herself and her past? And most importantly, how did William fit into the story of her life? With the letter in her hand, Vanessa knew one thing for certain. Her world was about to be turned upside down. Vanessa sat in the dimly lit office, holding the letter in her hands as if it were the key to unlocking a mystery she had never known existed. The weight of what she had just read settled over her like a thick fog, and for a moment, she felt completely overwhelmed. The letter, written by William Hartford himself, was filled with regret, sorrow, and a sense of lost time. It was clear that William had loved this woman deeply, and the child, his daughter, had been a part of his life that he had been unable to hold on to. As Vanessa read through the letter again, trying to make sense of the emotions expressed on the pages, she realized just how much she still didn't know. There were so many unanswered questions. Who was this woman? What had happened to her? Why had William been kept apart from his child? And the most pressing question of all, was Vanessa connected to this family, this hidden part of William's life? The letter seemed to imply that William had hoped to reunite with his daughter before his death, but had he ever succeeded? Vanessa knew she couldn't sit on this information any longer. The need to find answers was too strong, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized that someone had to know the truth. But who? William had been a solitary man, surrounded by a team of lawyers and business associates, but none of them seemed to care much about the personal side of his life. They were focused on his empire, his wealth, and his business dealings. But there was one person who stood out, Mr. Griffin, the lawyer who had been overseeing William's affairs since he fell into the coma. Vanessa had always felt that something was off about Mr. Griffin. He was polite and professional, but there was a coldness to him, a sense that he wasn't truly invested in William as a person. To him, William was just another client, another business transaction. But it was clear from the letter that William had trusted someone with his secret, someone who could have known more about his family than anyone else. The next day, after her shift, Vanessa made a decision. She would speak to Mr. Griffin. She needed answers, and he was the only person who might be able to provide them. With the letter in her pocket, she walked to the lawyer's office, her heart pounding with both anticipation and fear. What would she say to him? How would he react when she asked about William's family, about the woman and child mentioned in the letter? When she arrived, Mr. Griffin was sitting at his desk, reviewing documents as usual. He looked up with a smile when she entered, but there was a hint of wariness in his eyes. He had always been polite, but there was something about him that made Vanessa feel like he was hiding something. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves, and sat down across from him. "Mr. Griffin," she began, her voice steady despite the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. "I need to ask you about William Hartford, about his family." His expression didn't change, but she could tell that her words had caught his attention. He set down the papers he had been holding and leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean," he said, his tone carefully neutral. Vanessa wasn't fooled. She had heard the rumors about William's past, about lost loves and family secrets. And now, with the letter in her hand, she knew there was more to the story than anyone had let on. She decided to press further. "I've come across some documents," she said carefully, "and I believe there's something important about William's past that no one's been willing to talk about. Something about a woman and a child. His daughter. Do you know anything about that?" Mr. Griffin's face remained unreadable, but Vanessa noticed a shift in his demeanor. His eyes flickered for just a moment, and he seemed to hesitate before responding. "I'm afraid I can't speak on that," he said, his voice now colder, more distant. "It's not something that concerns you." Vanessa's heart raced as she processed his words. There was something he was hiding. She could feel it. But what was it? Why was he so determined to keep this part of William's life a secret? "I think it concerns me more than you realize," she replied, her voice firm. "I believe that woman, the one in the photographs, is my grandmother. And if that's true, then I have a right to know more about William Hartford's family." For a moment, there was silence between them. Mr. Griffin didn't respond right away, and Vanessa's mind raced. Was she right? Was she truly connected to this hidden part of William's life? She didn't know yet, but she was determined to find out. Finally, Mr. Griffin stood up, his face hardening. "This is not something you should pursue, Vanessa. Trust me, it's best left alone." But Vanessa wasn't going to back down. Vanessa left Mr. Griffin's office with a mix of emotions swirling inside her: anger, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of determination. His refusal to answer her questions only deepened her resolve to uncover the truth. She had come so far already, and she couldn't turn back now. If William Hartford really was her grandfather, then that meant everything she had known about her own family might be different. Over the next few days, Vanessa found herself consumed by the mystery. She couldn't stop thinking about the letter, the photograph, and Mr. Griffin's strange behavior. The pieces were there, but they were still scattered, just out of reach. She needed more information, something concrete that could confirm what she was beginning to suspect. Determined to find answers, she turned to the one person she thought might be able to help: her childhood friend, Tessa, who had always been a bit of a history buff. Tessa was the type of person who could dig up information on almost anyone, no matter how obscure. If there were records or details about William Hartford's past that had been hidden away, Tessa could find them. Vanessa explained everything to Tessa over the phone, from the letter to the photograph, and Tessa immediately agreed to help. "I'll start looking into it," she said. "Don't worry, I'll get to the bottom of it. Just keep me posted." The next few days were a blur for Vanessa as she continued her nursing duties while waiting for Tessa's update. The more she thought about the photographs, the more she couldn't shake the feeling that she was somehow connected to William. Not just through the woman in the picture, but through something deeper. She wasn't just a nurse taking care of an old man in a coma. She was connected to his past, and now it seemed as though fate had brought her to this moment for a reason. Then, one evening, Tessa called with the news. "I found something," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "It's not much, but it's something. I found a record of William Hartford having an affair with a woman named Eleanor Thomas. According to the records, she had a daughter, born in the early 80s. The daughter's name wasn't listed, but the dates match up. And get this, Eleanor was listed as a close associate of Hartford for years before disappearing from the public eye." Vanessa felt her heart race. It was starting to come together. Eleanor Thomas. Could this be the woman in the photograph? And if she had a daughter, that would mean Vanessa was right. She had to find out more. "Can you dig deeper?" she asked Tessa. "I need to know everything about Eleanor, about her daughter, and what happened to them." Tessa agreed to keep digging, but Vanessa knew it would take time. Meanwhile, she couldn't just sit idly by, waiting for answers. She decided to take matters into her own hands and try to find more about Eleanor and the child herself. There had to be something in the records at the hospital, some old paper trail that could shed light on this secret part of William's life. Late one night, Vanessa returned to William's room, her mind spinning with the new information. She carefully examined his personal files, trying to find any mention of Eleanor Thomas or the daughter who had been linked to her. She went through documents, letters, and records until she finally found a reference to Eleanor in a medical file dated back to the late 1980s. There it was, buried among the other papers. A brief mention of Eleanor being treated at a private clinic for complications during her pregnancy. The file didn't give much else, but it confirmed that Eleanor had been involved in William's life during that time. It also confirmed that the child, though unnamed in the records, had been born during a time when William had been at the peak of his career. This added another layer to the mystery. Why had he never spoken about this part of his life? And where had Eleanor and the child gone? Vanessa's head spun as she sat in the dim light of William's room, piecing together the fragments of the story. She now had a new sense of urgency. It wasn't just about discovering her connection to William Hartford anymore. It was about understanding what had happened to this woman and child, why they had disappeared, and whether or not she was really the granddaughter of a man who had lived a life full of secrets. As Vanessa pondered all these questions, the weight of the situation pressed down on her. She felt as if she were standing on the edge of something life-changing, but she wasn't sure whether she was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The answers she sought could reshape her entire understanding of her family, of her own identity, and she knew that once she found the truth, there would be no turning back. Vanessa spent the following days in a daze, her thoughts constantly on the mystery that seemed to be growing more complicated with each new discovery. She felt as if she were walking through a fog, unsure of what was real and what was just speculation. Each new piece of information seemed to point to a truth that was both thrilling and terrifying. She was beginning to realize that the family she thought she knew, the life she had lived, might not be as straightforward as she had believed. Tessa had been digging for hours into old records, following the trail of Eleanor Thomas, but the information was scarce. It seemed that Eleanor had completely vanished from the public eye after a brief period of involvement with William. There were no clear answers about what had happened to her or the child. The mystery deepened, and the more Vanessa uncovered, the more she realized that William Hartford's life was far more complex than she could have imagined. One afternoon, as Vanessa walked through the mansion's grand hallway, her mind swirling with questions, she was interrupted by a soft knock on the door to William's room. It was a nurse from the staff who handed her a message with a serious expression. It was from Mr. Griffin, the lawyer. The message read, "We need to speak. Please come to my office as soon as possible." Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. She had known Mr. Griffin would not let her investigation slide, but she wasn't sure what to expect. What could he want now? Why was he reaching out to her? She had already pressed him on the matter of William's family, and his refusal to answer her questions had only made her more determined to find the truth. Her nerves flared, but she knew she couldn't avoid this meeting. She took a deep breath and made her way to Mr. Griffin's office, her mind racing. When she arrived, he was waiting for her, sitting behind his large, polished desk. The air between them felt charged with tension. He gestured for her to sit, and after a long moment of silence, he finally spoke. "Vanessa," Mr. Griffin began, his tone softer than she had ever heard it before. "I believe it's time you knew the full story." Vanessa's pulse quickened. She wasn't sure if she was ready to hear what he had to say, but she had to know. She had already come so far. The mystery that had been unfolding around her now felt like a web of secrets, and she was about to step right into the center of it. William Hartford, Mr. Griffin continued, was a man of many talents, but he was also a man of many mistakes. The woman you've been looking into, Eleanor Thomas, was the love of his life, until a series of unfortunate events tore them apart. I don't think anyone truly understands the depth of what William lost. Vanessa listened intently, her heart pounding in her chest. She had always known there was something hidden behind the walls of the grand mansion, but she never could have imagined the truth being so complex. "The truth," Mr. Griffin said, "is that William never stopped loving Eleanor. and he never stopped trying to find her. The child you've been asking about, his daughter, she was the one thing that haunted him for years. Eleanor disappeared not because she wanted to, but because circumstances forced her to. And William, he had no idea where she went or if she was even alive. Vanessa felt her breath catch. She had always suspected that William's past held deep pain, but hearing it from Mr. Griffin, who had been close to him for so long, made it all the more real. William Hartford had loved a woman and lost everything, including the child he had never been able to meet. Eleanor didn't disappear on her own terms, Mr. Griffin added, his voice quiet with regret. She was forced into hiding. After the birth of her daughter, she became involved in something dangerous, something that William couldn't protect her from. He tried to reach her, but by the time he had the means to help, it was too late. Vanessa could hardly believe what she was hearing. It was all so surreal. William, the cold, distant billionaire she had been taking care of, had once had a life full of love, loss, and longing. He had been a man who had been trapped in a past he couldn't escape, even though the world saw him as nothing more than a business mogul. Mr. Griffin paused, and then he added something that made Vanessa's heart skip a beat. "You're not just connected to this story, Vanessa. You're part of it." For a moment, Vanessa felt the room spin. She didn't know what to think. Was he suggesting what she feared? Was she truly William Hartford's granddaughter? Was the connection she had felt all this time real? "William believed you were the key to finding the answers," Mr. Griffin continued. "He thought you might be the one to unravel everything. The pieces of the puzzle have been scattered for so long, but I believe it's time for the truth to be revealed." Vanessa sat there in stunned silence, her mind racing to make sense of what Mr. Griffin had just told her. The revelation that she was somehow connected to William Hartford, that she might be his granddaughter, seemed impossible. She had always known that her family's past was complicated, but this was something beyond anything she had ever imagined. She looked at Mr. Griffin, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do you know all of this?" Mr. Griffin didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an old, worn envelope. He placed it on the table in front of her. "This," he said, "is something William entrusted to me many years ago. He believed that one day someone would come looking for answers. He wanted you to have this." Vanessa hesitated for a moment, staring at the envelope. It was sealed with a faint wax stamp, and the handwriting on the front looked like William's. She could feel the weight of the moment. This could be the key to unlocking everything. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope and pulled out a letter. The letter, written in a neat, precise hand, began with a confession, a letter from William to his unborn child. He spoke of regret and sorrow, of the love he had lost, and the dreams he had for the future that had been ripped away from him. He wrote about Eleanor, the woman he had loved with all his heart, and the daughter they had created together. He spoke of how he had searched for her for years, but had never been able to find her. And then he made a promise. "I want you to know, my dear child," the letter read, "that even though we have never met, I have always loved you. You are a part of me, and no matter what happens, you will always be my daughter. I hope one day you will come to find the truth of who you are and the family that has been waiting for you." Vanessa felt a lump form in her throat as she read the words. She could barely hold back the tears. She had never known her father, and now to find out that this man, this stranger, had been her grandfather all along was overwhelming. But it was also heartwarming in a way. She wasn't just a nurse taking care of an old man. She was connected to this story in a way she hadn't fully realized until now. She was part of a legacy, a family that had been fractured by time and secrets, but one that was finally beginning to come together. She looked up from the letter, her gaze meeting Mr. Griffin's. "So this means I really am his granddaughter, Eleanor's daughter." Mr. Griffin nodded slowly. "Yes, William believed you were Eleanor's daughter. He had no idea where she went after everything fell apart, but he hoped, prayed even, that one day he would be able to find you. Vanessa felt a whirlwind of emotions. She wasn't sure what to feel. Grief for the family she had lost, relief that she had finally discovered the truth, or excitement for the future that might await her now that she understood her connection to William Hartford. She was part of something much bigger than she had ever imagined. "But why didn't anyone tell me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why all the secrecy?" Mr. Griffin sighed, his face softening with a hint of sadness. "The truth is, Eleanor's disappearance was not just a personal tragedy. It was tied to things that were bigger than William and her. There were forces at work, people who wanted to keep them apart for reasons that have never fully come to light. William didn't want to burden you with that. He wanted you to have a chance at a normal life, free from the pain of the past." Vanessa nodded, trying to process all that he had said. She had always felt like there was something missing in her life, like a piece of the puzzle that hadn't quite fit. Now she realized that missing piece was a family, one she had never known about until now. It wasn't just the answers she had been looking for. It was a whole new chapter of her life that was unfolding before her. "I need to know more," she said, her voice filled with determination. "I need to understand what happened to Eleanor and what kept her away from William. I have to know everything, Mr. Griffin." He looked at her thoughtfully, then nodded. "I understand. But be careful, Vanessa. The past is not something that can be undone. There are people who would prefer that these secrets remain buried. I don't want you to get hurt." Vanessa stood up, feeling a new sense of purpose. She wasn't going to back down. The truth was within her reach, and she was determined to find it. She had always believed that everything happened for a reason, and now it was clear that her path had led her here for a purpose. "Thank you," she said quietly, tucking the letter into her bag. "I'll be careful. But I have to know the truth." Vanessa walked back to William's room with a new sense of determination. The letter she had just read, the words of her grandfather, seemed to echo in her mind. She was no longer just a nurse looking after a patient. She was a part of a story much bigger than herself, one that spanned generations and was filled with secrets. The mystery that had once seemed so complicated now felt like a puzzle she was ready to solve, no matter how difficult it might be. Her mind raced with questions. What had happened to Eleanor? Why had she disappeared? And why had William never mentioned her, even after all these years? Vanessa needed answers, but she knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed to understand the forces that had kept her family apart, and she needed to find out where Eleanor had gone, and if she was still alive. Over the next few days, Vanessa threw herself into the search. She worked with Tessa to follow up on any leads they could find. They contacted old friends of William and Eleanor, hoping to piece together the lost parts of the story. But the deeper they dug, the more elusive the answers became. Everyone they spoke to seemed to be afraid to talk, or simply didn't know anything. It was as if a veil had been drawn over the entire situation, and no one wanted to pull it back. Vanessa refused to give up. She couldn't. She knew that whatever had happened to Eleanor and her family, it was important. It was a part of her own history, and she needed to understand it. One evening, after a long day of digging through records and talking to people who had known William and Eleanor, Vanessa found herself sitting alone in William's room once again. The mansion, with its quiet, empty halls, felt colder than ever before. As she sat in the dim light, she thought about all that she had learned, and all that was still unknown. She realized that the key to understanding everything lay in uncovering the truth about Eleanor's disappearance. But how could she find that answer? What if the truth was something too painful to bear? Just then, she noticed something odd. A small leather-bound book was tucked away on the shelf beside William's bed. It wasn't like any of the other books there. It was old, worn, and had a lock on it. Vanessa's curiosity got the better of her, and she carefully pulled the book off the shelf. She examined it, turning it over in her hands. The book was sealed shut with a tiny, intricate lock. She had seen a key hanging from a chain around William's neck a few times, and she realized that this key might open the book. Her heart beat faster as she walked over to where William lay in his coma, the key still hanging from his neck. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. But she knew she had to take this step. This was a part of the mystery, and it was hers to solve. With a steady hand, Vanessa took the key from William's neck. She turned it carefully in the lock, and to her surprise, it clicked open. The book was filled with handwritten notes, letters, and entries in William's neat handwriting. As she flipped through the pages, she began to piece together the story of Eleanor's disappearance. There were entries about their secret meetings, the plans they had made to escape together, and the dangers that had come from people trying to keep them apart. One entry, in particular, caught her attention. It was dated just days before Eleanor vanished. It read, "I've been given an ultimatum. I cannot take our child, and I cannot stay here. The people who want to separate us are dangerous, and I cannot put you or our daughter at risk. I will leave, but I will never stop loving you. I promise you, William, I will find a way back to you one day." Vanessa felt her breath catch as she read the words. This was the last message from Eleanor, the last piece of the puzzle that William had left behind. Eleanor had left, not because she wanted to, but because she had been forced to for their safety. It was clear now that there had been more at play than just love and loss. There had been real danger, something that had threatened not only their relationship but their very lives. Vanessa's hand shook as she closed the book, feeling the weight of the story she had just uncovered. This wasn't just about William and Eleanor anymore. It was about her own place in their story, about the family that had been torn apart by forces beyond their control. She had found the truth, but it was just the beginning. There was still so much to understand, so much to uncover. But even as she grappled with the weight of what she had learned, Vanessa knew that she had made the right choice. She had uncovered the truth, and now it was her responsibility to honor the legacy of her family, to find out what had really happened, and to ensure that the story didn't end in the shadows.